So we're going to talk real quick about through bolting or screwing fittings to a deck that is cored. So that means we have 2 layers of fiberglass with a core layer in between them, typically foam, sometimes plywood. What you want to make sure is that you are sealing and not allowing any water to get into the core if your fitting ever leaks or your sealant doesn't leak, or if your sealant leaks. So what we've done here, this is an example, and it's a little hard to see, but before we mounted this fitting here, we drilled through with an oversized hole. So you're going to drill all the way through or penetrate the deck if you're just screwing with a screw. Drill all the way through, and then we tape the bottom of the hole, and we use some thickened epoxy like this 610 right here because it's really easy to use because it has this applicator on it. So we then fill that and let it cure for 24 hours. So what that means is because we over drill, say if you're using a 5/16 fastener, you can drill a larger hole, say it could be 5/8, could be 3/4, but larger than the diameter of the bolt that you're using. Once it's cured, you can drill through the center of that epoxy and then through bolt there. And that does two things. One, if you don't use enough sealant or if your sealant goes bad and water penetrates, you won't have water penetrating into the core. It'll only be making contact with the thickened epoxy. And two, it means you can't over compress the deck because you have an epoxy wedge there. So the bolt head and the washers and the nuts can't compress the core, but it's actually surprisingly easy to do if you over tighten it. So it makes a really nice solid wedge. We did this when we mounted the solar on this deck. We can go look up top real quick. When we mounted our brackets, figured out exactly where the bracket needed to go, drilled our pilot hole, drilled an oversized hole, injected the epoxy into it, let it cure, drilled the center hole through the epoxy, and then through bolted it after the fact. So it's nice and safe and sealed, and will have a real long life. So this is our top view of that bolt or nut that we saw down below. And so if you can imagine, this is the gel coat, this is the top layer, then there's some foam, and then there's the fiberglass layer on the bottom. And so where we drilled and mounted these bases, again, we laid out the panel location, figured out where the brackets were going to go, and then marked our holes, drilled our initial pilot hole, drilled the oversized hole, and then took tape from the bottom so we were capturing any of the epoxy, injected it from the top, wiped it nice and flush. We let it cure. Then the next day, once it's cured, we drill our center hole, which is smaller than the overall diameter of the epoxy. And then we can add our adhesive sealant, the CT1, to create a seal, tighten everything down. We're protected from over tightening because of the epoxy in there. And we have a seal, but if anything were to ever fail, we do have insurance that we will never have spider cracking or damage to the gel coat around where the bracket is mounted. And so again, just to reiterate that this is specifically for a core deck situation. If you're drilling through solid fiberglass, you have a solid substrate, so you're not going to crush anything. And obviously you want to seal it well, but if you did have leak, you don't have a core that's going to get rotten. So in that case, the most important thing is that you drill through and then do a nice countersink. And we have another video on that. But countersink the hole so that when you run your fastener through, when it side loads, it doesn't crack the gel coat on the surface. And it allows for a nice wedge of sealant to sit around the head of the fastener or just underneath the fastener. So only epoxy when you are dealing with a core deck, with a solid deck. It's just very important to hit your countersinks.